Welcome to episode 358 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Bryan Lee Travers, who served in the FBI for 25 years, 5 as a latent print examiner and 20 as a special agent. In this episode, he reviews his investigation of Alfred Scarpa for illegally selling anabolic steroids, which Scarpa manufactured and stored in the basement of his residence. The case was part of Operation Raw Deal, a nationwide DEA-led investigation and takedown of individuals engaged in the illegal manufacturing and trafficking of anabolic steroids and its raw materials, mainly from China, along with the human growth hormone, HGH, and insulin growth factor, IGF. Scarpa was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 33 months in federal prison. The entire international Operation Raw Deal investigation resulted in more than 124 arrests in the United States. Retired agent Bryan Travers' first bureau assignment was in the latent print unit of the FBI laboratory. Bryan received certification as an FBI physical scientist, latent print examiner 1 month before the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He volunteered to be on the first shift of laboratory examiners receiving evidence collected from the 3 crash sites. A few months later, he was dispatched to the New York City morgue to assist with identification efforts. Bryan received his appointment as a special agent in 2004. After graduating from the academy, he was assigned to a white-collar crime squad in the Newark division, where he worked healthcare and bank and mortgage fraud. After the success of his anabolic steroid case, he was transferred to a drug squad. While working drug cases, he became the backup media representative for the Newark division. He took over the position full-time for 4 years. After his tenure as the media rep, Bryan returned to investigative casework, working cybercrime and internet fraud for a year before becoming a pilot and joining the Special Operations Group for full-time surveillance operations. His last assignment prior to retiring from the FBI was in national security, assessing threats from the Chinese Communist Party to U.S. academic institutions, corporations, and infrastructure. Currently, Bryan is working as a professionally trained actor and voiceover artist. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com. You'll also find links to where you can buy me a cup of coffee, join my reader team about crime fiction and the FBI and books, TV, and movies, and learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Bryan Travers.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm doing great. We connected on LinkedIn, and I'm always looking for interesting and fascinating cases. And I asked you if you had one, and you told me about a steroid healthcare fraud case. And I'm like, I haven't had one of those before. So this should be pretty cool. What was the name of the case?
It was actually a DEA-led operation. It was a worldwide operation called Operation Raw Deal.
All right. Where do you want to start with Operation Raw Deal?
Let's start at the beginning. I was a relatively new agent with 2 years on. This would have been 2006. I was assigned to work healthcare fraud out of the academy. And I wasn't too happy about that because if you know anything about working healthcare fraud, most of it is a lot of record review. It's a lot of paper. And I wanted to be what we refer to affectionately in the FBI as the knuckle draggers. I wanted to be out on the street, kicking down doors, arresting bad guys, that sort of thing.
I can relate because one of my first assignments was government fraud.
Oh, yeah.
And I did not like that at all. It wasn't until I transferred from Sacramento to Philly that I got assigned to an economic crime squad where the fraud actually had people, individuals as victims. And then I was like, yeah, I like this.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. You need people involved. It's no fun if it's just paper and numbers. I quickly learned that it is what you make of it. So I was on the lookout for something that would get me an interesting case. When you work healthcare fraud, they frequently send you to healthcare fraud conferences. They're usually sponsored by the big insurance companies, and there's a partnership there, so they're quite good. I went to one in Boston, and there was a New Haven FBI agent. He presented a case called Operation Gear Grinder, which was also a DEA-led operation, and it was actually the precursor to Operation Raw Deal. Gear Grinder targeted some of the largest steroid manufacturing companies in Mexico. When they all went down, China was all too eager to fill the void. It wasn't just China, but mostly China. At the time of this conference, they were talking about putting this new operation together, this worldwide operation, Operation Raw Deal. The way he was talking about this case, and they were doing surveillance, and they were out on the street, and they were doing this and that, that's what I've been waiting for. I went back to Newark. I started talking this up to my supervisor and to the management. Actually, first thing I did was I called the lead DEA agent based in San Diego to get more information. And I called our headquarters desk, which at the time was staffed by Supervisory Special Agent Ludmilla Regal. She was very eager to take my call. She says, yes, the FBI is very happy to partner with DEA on this. We have a number of investigations going around the country, and we have plenty of work to go around. We definitely can find you some leads in New Jersey if you guys are so inclined. That's all I needed to hear, and I went back to management. Let me take you back to that time period in the early 2000s. Anabolic steroids were very much in the news back then. There was a big break in a company called Balco, which stood for the Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative. If that name sounds familiar to people, they were the ones that all of the Major League Baseball players were getting their steroids from, namely Barry Bonds, the New York Yankees' Jason Giambi. There was actually an Olympic athlete, Marion Jones, and a lot of other famous sports figures. They were all involved with this Balco steroid scandal. In New Jersey, locally, there were a number of, I don't want to say cases, but there were allegations in the news about doping in high school sports, namely that coaches were encouraging high school athletes to engage in this, which was just outrageous. And then in New Jersey, there was also allegations of police departments, cops using steroids. Now, this obviously wasn't endorsed by the police department. They were doing this on their own, but it was widely known. It was cops and firefighters. And that wasn't just New Jersey. That was all around the country, but it was in the news in New Jersey.
Were these police officers getting these steroids illegally? I mean, where were they getting them from?
They're all illegal. Anabolic steroids were illegal for a number of years, probably about 20 years, maybe a little bit more in the United States. In the 70s, they were not illegal. That's when guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno, the big giant bodybuilders, were using them. But people didn't know too much about the effects or anything. It was, you can get them. But then once that knowledge came out, then they became illegal. And it was also looked as a form of cheating in athletics. So they had been illegal for a long time. That was the only way to get them. And a lot of them came across the border.
I was going to ask a really basic question. Of course, I know about, as you were talking about, them being used in weightlifting and in sports, but there may be people listening that have no idea what steroids do. So let's just get a basic understanding of why anybody would want to take them in the first place.
A lot of the times nowadays, when you hear of steroids, people are thinking of medication. Like I have asthma. I've been prescribed prednisone before. Prednisone is a steroid, but it's not an anabolic steroid. It targets a different area of the body and it works in a different method. Anabolic steroids are basically forms of testosterone, whether it's natural, and in most cases, it's laboratory created. But it's a form of testosterone and it targets the sex characteristics. which is why bodybuilders get these huge muscles because it's enhancing the male characteristics. But there are side effects because while it may enhance the muscles, it has very bad effects on other parts of the body. It can actually reverse other sex characteristics. So males will develop breasts, women will develop facial hair. It does horrible things to the liver. It could cause high blood pressure, heart problems, all sorts of issues. Not to mention, you run the risk of intravenous drug use diseases such as hepatitis and even AIDS because that's how they're administered through injections. It's pretty nasty business.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, you've got the aesthetics of it. You look good, you look muscular, you look fit, but inside it's really running havoc on your body.
Yeah, well, it's a hormone. Hormones naturally are very powerful within the body. Now you go introducing external hormones into your system and it just wreaks all kinds of havoc. Like I said, it's bad news, especially if it's being targeted toward kids who are still developing. I can't stress that enough. That was the big thing that convinced Newark management to go forward with this case, aside from the fact that we had backing from headquarters, which always helps. Now, the next part that was the critical piece, and you're very aware of this, the FBI could have the greatest idea in the world for a case, but unless it's going to be prosecuted, we're dead in the water. So I had to make the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office and convince them. When I first learned about this, one of my first phone calls was to DEA Newark. I said, hey, are you guys aware of this? Are you part of this? And they're like, oh, we're not going to participate. And I said, why not? And they said, because it's never going to get prosecuted. We looked at that a long, long time ago. That's never going to get prosecuted.
Why would they say that? Because it was already successful with Operation Gear Grinder, where they took out the whole Mexican supplier.
First of all, different districts look at things differently. But the other piece of it is they were looking at it from what's known as an OCDETF perspective, Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. They were looking at it under Title 21, which is all the drug laws. The drug unit in the District of New Jersey didn't want any part of it because they felt the penalties weren't that great compared to cocaine and crack were the big things, and that's what we should be focused on. Kind of like now we're looking at fentanyl as the big thing. They were looking more at crack cocaine and cocaine possession. Anabolic steroids didn't figure into it. But here's the thing. The FBI wasn't looking at it from an OCDETF perspective. We were looking at it from a healthcare fraud perspective. And what does that mean? Well, that means we were looking at it from importing illegal substances or controlled substances for the purpose of mislabeling, passing yourself off as a healthcare professional or a pharmaceutical professional, all of those kinds of things. That fell under a whole different basket of laws, of federal laws, and had way different penalties. And the healthcare fraud penalties actually had more bite to them than the drug penalties with regard to steroids. So I presented it to the AUSA, who at the time was Robert Kirsch. He never worked a case like this, and he was absolutely intrigued. And he said, yeah, I've been reading about this in the news. He's like, this sounds like a great idea. And the fact that it's part of a worldwide takedown, I don't see why we shouldn't do this. Let's give it a go. So I went back to the DEA and I said, well, guess what? I actually got a prosecutor to sign off. And they're like, no, you did. Yes, yeah, I did. But it's not going to be a drug prosecutor. It's under the healthcare fraud. Well, then they immediately jumped on board. They're like, well, yeah, then let's go. It was critical that DEA participate because we were dealing with an underground laboratory. The general public might not be aware of this. When it comes to dismantling underground laboratories, that's really the DEA's forte. The FBI doesn't really get trained on doing those things. I mean, we have hazmat units and everything, but when you're dealing with underground labs, there's specific cautions, specific things that you have to deal with. I mean, we wouldn't touch a meth lab because those things, they explode frequently. If you don't know what you're doing and you don't have the proper training, you don't belong there. So it was critical to bring DEA on board for that purpose.
So you're saying underground labs. I was under the impression, obviously I was wrong, that these steroids were being imported already designed and created.
No.
Oh.
These were the precursors. All of the ones in my case were being imported from China. I'll talk more about that later. But these were all namely powders. The subject in this case He had absolutely no pharmaceutical training whatsoever. He was just mixing and matching stuff in his basement, slapping a label on it and selling it over the internet to people that wanted this stuff. That's not a good way to do business, especially if you're putting it in your body. But this was the only way you could get these kind of substances. This is what this guy was doing. Now, let me back up for a second. The strategy for Raw Deal had 4 parts to it. One part was focusing on the raw materials, which is the importation of the powders and all of that. The other part was the underground labs, which is what I was looking at. Then there were the websites. I don't know that I would call them dark web because that really wasn't a thing back then, but they were kind of, you had to look for them. These websites and chat groups where these things were marketed and sold. And then there were also targeting internet bodybuilding discussion boards where they were teaching people how to use them, how to obtain them, and all of that. So there was a 4-pronged strategy to attack this problem worldwide. I think it was actually a very well thought out strategy. It worked well. So we got management on board. We got the AUSAs on board, the U.S. Attorney's Office on board, and we got DEA on board. We also wanted to get FDA on board because, as I mentioned before, we're looking at the regulatory aspects of this, importing these unregulated substances into the country and marketing them and so forth. We wanted FDA on it. But another group that was absolutely essential to have was the United States Postal Inspection Service, because the only information that we got from DEA San Diego in our lead was that there were packages being shipped to UPS stores from China and packages being shipped out of New Jersey UPS stores with the name Global Pharmaceuticals. That's all we knew. Obviously, they got that information from other cases that were worked and brought down. We had to take that information and run with it. What did we do? We went to the UPS stores. We were looking for this information. They said, oh, yeah, well, these packages come in here. They come in here. This guy, he signed up for this box. Well, what's his name? There were a couple where we didn't have a true name. We just had a phony business name, like Global Pharmaceuticals, for example. We got some subpoenas. We started looking at the email that was given at the UPS stores, along with some of the traffic that we saw. And putting those pieces together, we identified our subject. His name was Alfred Scarpa, and he was a resident of Sayreville, New Jersey.
What was the first thing that led you to Global Pharmaceuticals? I know you had this concept for this operation. How did you know you were having a problem in the Newark area?
That lead came from the DEA San Diego office because they were the people that initiated this whole global takedown.
Okay, I see. In that big case, as they saw different areas around the country where these steroids were being shipped or purchased, then they sent leads to those offices to say, hey, you got a problem in your area.
Yeah, effectively, they were a clearinghouse for information on this case. So anything you needed to know, you called up DEA San Diego, and within an hour or so, they can get an answer for you on something. It worked very well. Now we had the name and address of a person. We looked up this person. We did our criminal history checks, and we found out this guy was a 2-time drug offender in more than one ways. So, okay, where there's smoke, there's fire. We know we're on the right track. We got the U.S. Postal Service Inspection Service. They started monitoring these packages. I want to emphasize this is the benefit of partnership on a task force, because the FBI, we do many things, but we don't do mail. That's not our thing. That's not our strength. Whereas the Postal Inspection Service, that's all they do. I found over my career, it's much better to work with other agencies because there are certain hurdles that I can't overcome that they don't even have to bat an eyelash, and it's done, and vice versa. Having that partnership just makes everything work like a well-oiled machine. And that's why we had all these different groups involved: DEA, FDA, U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and FBI, and even local and state partners on some of these things. It worked very well. The Postal Inspection Service starts monitoring these packages coming and going. And it seemed like every day we found another UPS store where these packages were coming and going from. They were all over the state. And I should mention that Mr. Scarpa worked a job where I think he was setting up video in-home theater systems or something like that. it allowed him to travel all over the state. So it made sense that he would have UPS boxes all over the state. Each store had a different phony company name with it. So one was Global Pharmaceuticals, one was, Power Pharmaceuticals. Each one had a different name. It kind of masked who he was, but now we already knew who he was. We also did a trash pull several times, and we found the actual boxes in his trash. We found receipts from UPS stores. We found shipping receipts inside some of these boxes, which led us to a particular individual in China that was shipping these powders. It was someone going by the name of Lily. Obviously, we didn't know who Lily was, but it was always the same person. No matter which UPS store we got a box from, it seemed to always come from Lily in China. That corresponded with email, which we got later on. Let me back up here. We're doing our surveillance. We follow him not only to these UPS stores, but on occasion, we see him going into different gyms around the state. So, there's another piece of the puzzle. No surprise there. We were up on this guy for the better part of a year. On September 20, 2007, we executed a combination search warrant and arrest warrant at Scarpa's home in Sayreville. We seized $56,000 in cash, which was just laying on the dining room table. We had more than 40,000 doses of anabolic steroids and various chemicals and precursors and equipment used to mix and produce the drugs. I mean, he had a centrifuge in his basement. Why do you need a centrifuge? You don't even know what a centrifuge is. He had 2 semi-automatic weapons, which he wasn't supposed to have as a convicted felon, so that was a problem. It was amazing because there were needles all over the house. I think he was using some of the stuff as well, and he had a newborn at the time, so that was very concerning. The one thing I will say, to his credit, he talked to us right away.
Did he suspect that he was under investigation? Did he have any clue?
No, he didn't. It wasn't until his wife called him and said, the FBI and DEA are staying in our living room. Can you come home now? And he knew it was up. As soon as he pulled up, he just walked right up to us and put his hands out. He knew he was going to jail.
What was the type of drugs that he had been involved in before?
It was cocaine. It was always cocaine.
He didn't learn his lesson. I guess he thought this was a lesser type of drug.
Interestingly enough, we're going to talk about that very point a little bit later on. So he had the 2 weapons, and he began to talk to us right away. We learned about a co-conspirator named Joshua Holder who was in Calumet, Indiana. And we found out, and this was pretty alarming, they had purchased a pill press together for the purpose of making Xanax tablets that, according to Mr. Holder anyway, he was going to sell them to kids at a local school. Stop and think about that for a second, especially if you have kids. That's just horrific. Now, we never saw the pill press or any evidence thereof in New Jersey, and it seemed that Mr. Holder was the one that took possession of it. Mr. Scarpa sent money to Mr. Holder, and Mr. Holder actually did the purchase and receipt of the pill press. We started monitoring phone calls, and that's how we learned about the intent.
Do you know how they were connected? Because one is in New Jersey, one is in Indiana.
The way this whole thing worked worldwide, it was all of this email, and they were using encrypted email at the time. They were at least smart enough to know that, which I would argue shows intent to get around the law. Why else would you need to encrypt those communications? They were using encrypted email. They're going back and forth talking about, I need this much of Anabol. I need this here. Can you get me this product? I'll send you this. You owe me money for this. We're scratching our heads thinking, if these guys applied themselves to legitimate business, they'd do very well. Scarpa knew how to market himself. He knew how to come up with company names, how to wheel and deal with people, but he's doing it all for illicit business. It was a shame, and in many respects, it was kind of scary what they were up to. So Scarpa's arrested. He's facing prosecution. Now we're looking at Holder. We get arrest warrant for Holder. I go out to Indiana. We arrest him at his business, and he's found to have heroin in the car. He admits to me, he's like, look, I have a substance problem, so that's what that is. I'm not selling that, which based on the amount that he had, that seemed reasonable. But let's talk about that pill press, Josh. What pill press? What are you talking about? He didn't want to give that up. And we knew about it. And we said, well, where is it? Where is it? I don't know what you're talking about. Here's where partnering with the locals comes in, because we had local police on that arrest out there. They were familiar with Mr. Holder, and they also knew Mr. Holder's associates. And it turns out that there was another guy who was a known drug dealer, but also a bodybuilder. I'm not exactly sure how they came across it, because we let DEA in Indiana run with this, but they identified where the pill press was and they ended up seizing it. They made a case just on that alone, and they got that person. All of these people all around the world were communicating through encrypted email at the time. So that's why this was so widespread. That's why steroids exploded in the early 2000s. It was because of this communication. It made it so easy. Many, many years before that, you would have to actually drive to Mexico or know somebody that did go to Mexico to go get your steroids. That wasn't the case anymore, and that was all due to technology.
Made in the USA.
Yes.
So you were able to arrest Scarpa without him notifying Josh Holder. Then you were able to send information for them to execute that arrest warrant without him even knowing that he was in trouble.
I actually went out to Indiana and arrested Holder myself.
Oh, very nice.
Yes, it was the other subject that had possession of the pill press that we let the local DEA there handle that. Because when you're dealing with a big case like this, you have to stay focused. It's really easy to go down rabbit holes. But again, you don't want to lose your focus, because I'm still dealing with the prosecution of Scarpa and all of those leads that I had to send back to San Diego, because there was a lot of information. All of his customer base, that all went back to San Diego. And that customer base was all over the country.
Can we talk about his customer base just for a little bit? I'm trying to get an understanding. I know you found $56,000 in cash. What kind of business was he doing? I mean, was he getting rich off of this?
Sadly, no. I mean, he was driving a vehicle that, I don't know, maybe it might have been a little bit above his pay grade for what he was making, but he wasn't living the high life. What we found out from just talking with him was the guy sort of had like an inferiority complex with his group of friends. There were pictures of him hanging out with his buddies, everybody smoking cigars, and they all seemed to be doing well. And this guy is working hard, driving all over the state, doing his job, and he's just trying to keep up. He's got a newborn. I think it was just greed and keeping up with the Joneses. He told me several times, he's like, look, I'm not a violent guy. I said, I know you're not a violent guy, but I've got you on phone calls that you're conspiring to sell this stuff to kids. So that doesn't make me feel very good. I was just trying to make money to support my family. I said, look, my father worked a white collar job, and then at night he went and got a blue collar job so he could send me to college. So don't tell me that you're doing this to support your family. Okay. I don't buy it at all. And you have 56 grand in cash sitting on the dining room table. What's that all about? You got to throw these things back at these people when you sit down with them and make them face reality. And he did, to his credit. He admitted that he got lost along the way someplace. So he faced the judge. He went to court on September 9th, 2008. He appeared before the Honorable William Walls in New Jersey court. I'm not sure what happened with the U.S. Attorney's Office, but rather than pursue the healthcare fraud laws, they charged him with the drug laws, possessing and planning to distribute 40,000 doses of anabolic steroids. And he also got charged with the 2 handguns in violation of the trigger lock law, which prohibits felons from possessing firearms. And he also had the previous drug convictions, which the judge didn't look too favorably on. What I couldn't believe was that his attorney, Anthony Pope, stood up in court and actually argued for leniency. They didn't want any jail time. Are you kidding me? This guy's a 2-time convicted drug dealer. He's got 2 illegal guns. He's talking about selling drugs to kids, and you don't want him to do any jail time. Thankfully, Judge Walls felt the same way, and he said, look, the only reason Mr. Scarpa is standing in my courtroom is because 2 prior judges were lenient on him, and he made fools out of them. That's not going to happen today. He was facing 8 years, and he got 3. So he did a full 3-year bit in federal lockup for this. Now, Mr. Holder, on the other hand, wow. So he had to travel back and forth to New Jersey on his own dime because that's where the case was filed. And he went before the Honorable Catherine Hayden. He gave some kind of sob story about his life and blah, blah, blah. And she tried to be lenient on him until she discovered that he was lying about his finances. Now, remember, this guy owned his own business. He had all kinds of heavy equipment and stuff like that. He's pleading that he's got no finances or anything.
What was the business again?
A masonry business. She finds out that he's lying. I've been in her courtroom before. She tries to see things through everyone's perspective. She's very, I don't know what the word is, but she doesn't like to throw the book at people. But she did that day because there's not a judge in the world that likes to be lied to in their courtroom. And she exploded on him. I don't remember what his sentence was. It was probably a little bit more than Mr. Scarpa's, only because he was caught lying. Not a good strategy, not a good legal strategy at all. Now, this part is unbelievable. I have to talk about an unrelated case that ends up being related. As you know, when you're a case agent, you work more than one case. So I had a completely different case on ID fraud going, and I was working with the Secret Service on this. We were going after this guy named Abbas El-Shekali, and he was this prolific ID theft guy. He would steal IDs and print out credit cards, and I think every county in New Jersey wanted a piece of this guy.
Was he doing this on his own, or is it one of these identity theft rings?
Well, he was leading the ring.
Oh, okay.
And, when we arrested him, we found a house in Clifton, New Jersey. These women were working at these computers and they were just doing fraud all day long. That was their job. He was running the whole operation, and he was staying in another house in Elmwood Park, New Jersey that had no furniture. He was just sleeping on a bare floor. This guy was really weird. When he went to court, he tried to plead insanity when he's acting all weird. He's one of those guys. The reason I'm telling you that story is we locked him up around the same time that we locked up Scarpa from the steroid case. They're both in Passaic County Jail, which thankfully no longer exists. It was knocked down last September, actually. It was a horrible place, horrible place. This story doesn't make it any better. Scarpa faces the judge in September 2008. I think he was supposed to start serving his sentence in March of 2009. Because it was the summer of 2009, I get this weird phone call from Anthony Pope, his attorney. And he said, Agent Travers, I want to talk to you about, remember my client, Mr. Scarpa. He thinks that his ID was stolen. I said, well, okay, what do you want me to do about it? He's in prison. He's like, well, no, he thinks it was stolen in the jail when you arrested him. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. He was in jail, and I wouldn't be the one to investigate that anyway. You'd have to talk to the jail authorities. So we hang up. It couldn't have been more than a week later, a story hit the news that there was a widespread ID theft that happened in the Passaic County Jail. And I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, it occurred to me that our boy, Mr. El-Shekali, struck again, and that was, in fact, the case.
What?
Somehow, he got hold of records of other prisoners in the jail and exploited that to conduct ID fraud from the jail. Well, actually, later on, when he got out.
And that makes sense because if they're in jail, they probably would not be notified immediately that their identification was being used to make purchases and whatever transactions.
Well, you're correct. Mr. Pope said it was his wife that alerted them about it. He thought about it and he said, well, it's got to be in the jail. That's the only place. I still can't imagine how Mr. El-Shekali pulled that off, but he did, and we arrested him again. That was a separate case, but he got arrested again.
But he waited until he got out of jail in order to do this.
Yes.
Some people just don't learn their lessons.
You can't make this up. You just can't make it up. I really believe that El-Shekali had a compulsion to do this. This was his thing because there's just his overall behavior and the fact that you're in jail for this very thing and you're doing it from jail. How else would you explain that? But like I said, this wasn't like a great place. There were a lot of problems at Passaic County Jail, which, if people are interested, they can read about that themselves. Just to put a conclusion on this, Raw Deal began in 2005, and the total number of search warrants, there were 143 federal search warrants executed on targets all over. There were 124 arrests and the seizure of 56 steroid labs across the U.S., Mr. Scarpa's being one of them. And there were 11.4 million steroid dosage units seized and 242 kilos of raw steroid powder of Chinese origin. Now, let's talk about Lilly, because after we arrested Mr. Scarpa, we talked about him and we sifted through all of his email because he made it all available to us. We still didn't know who Lilly was, but we had quite a good idea, and we shared that with the Chinese authorities. And it turned out that Lilly was a woman who was working in a pharmaceutical factory in China and skimming product and selling it on the side.
Wow.
Yeah, that was another win as far as I see it, to take somebody like that off the street. There were $6.5 million seized, 25 vehicles, 3 boats, 27 pill presses, and 71 weapons. This is for the whole Operation Raw Deal. It was quite a story. Another point I want to make here, and I just want to emphasize this, I was one of many FBI agents that participated in this. I led the task force in New Jersey, but pretty much every state had one. Well, actually, no, let me back up here. It's 27 states had operations against Operation Raw Deal. So there were other FBI agents involved in this across the country.
Each one with their own unique subjects and circumstances.
That's correct.
Wow, that's fascinating. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, you had mentioned earlier on that in addition to someone like Scarpa and Holding doing something like this, that there were also some clinics, some anti-aging doctors and clinics that were distributing this illegal steroid. Did you ever get involved in that aspect of this healthcare fraud?
There was a clinic, I believe it was in Burlington County, New Jersey, which, as you know, is Philadelphia territory. So I turned that over to Philadelphia, but there wasn't a so-called anti-aging clinic. And all that really meant was that you can get human growth hormone and possibly steroids, but there's nothing anti-aging about it. If anything, it speeds up your aging. They were just fronts for that purpose. At least back then. I've seen anti-aging clinics these days, but I'm pretty sure that's something completely different. But back then, it was all about human growth hormone and steroids.
I'm all into the anti-aging right now.
Yeah. Aren't we all?
Oh my goodness. Nowadays, I don't hear a lot about steroids, but of course, people wanting to look beautiful and fit and muscular has to go on today, just like it did back when this case was being investigated. What do you know about today? And is this still going on, or did you basically, with these different operations, just kill the supply?
No, you're never going to completely shut it down. And I don't really hear about it too often. The only time I really hear about it these days is when the Olympics come around. And interestingly enough, the San Diego case agent who started this whole thing, and I wish I could remember his name so I could give him proper credit. But interestingly enough, he left the DEA and became part of the Anti-Doping Commission for the Olympics, which he did for a number of years. I don't know what he did after that, but he actually went and worked for the Olympic Committee in that respect. But that's really the only time I hear about steroids. I think the big scare now for anti-aging and looking good is Ozempic. And I'm not really an authority on Ozempic, but I heard a lot of celebrities are sticking themselves with that stuff and then they have problems later on. The bottom line is just be careful about what you put into your body. Always talk to your doctor. Don't be your own self-medicator, because there are people who are experts that can guide you properly on these things.
Yeah, I would imagine that anything, again, that will make you look healthy and beautiful and young can be exploited, and counterfeit versions manufactured in somebody's underground lab or basement, and the public is none the wiser.
I will say, be careful about buying medication online. Make sure it's definitely coming from a U.S. source, because there's a lot of Chinese counterfeit medication out there that's sold over the internet. If you're ever buying medication, make sure you get it from your local pharmacy or your proper mail order pharmaceutical company that your insurance company is hooked up with. Don't just buy stuff randomly online.
Thank you so much for sharing this case with us. We're at the time of the episode where I like to ask a little bit more questions about you. When and why did you join the FBI?
I was working as a drug counselor in Hudson County, New Jersey. I actually worked in the mental health field. I worked in psychiatric hospitals. I found myself running a group home program for mentally ill chemical abusers, which we called the MICA population. Some of the people that were in my program were court appointed. So it was either go get treatment or go to prison. And others were there because their mental illness just kept them from being productive citizens, sadly. I got tired of seeing the same faces day in and day out. You'd patch these people up, you'd send them back up out in the world, and then they'd come back 6 months later or whatever it is. So I had applied to an ad I saw on the internet. It was this little nondescript ad for forensic examiners, no experience needed, but science degree was required. And I had a degree in biology pre-med. And of course, I had my master's with substance abuse training. I thought, that sounds great. I applied, and it turns out that was the FBI laboratory, unbeknownst to me. And long story short, I got picked out of 500 applicants nationwide to go down to headquarters and work in the FBI lab. I worked in the latent print unit, and that was my start in September of 1999.
And how long did you do that before, obviously, you got interested in the agent position?
I was in the lab for 5 years. The nice thing about working in the lab is that we had our finger in every pie. We worked everything, a terrorism case, a drug case, a homicide case, you name it. There was everything. One of my instructors was part of the whole Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton thing. He got called into the White House to examine some fingerprints there. Another instructor got called into the State Department when a Russian spy device was found in the wall over there. I personally worked 9/11 and whatnot. And the other interesting thing was while I was working at the lab, I was moonlighting at America's Most Wanted, the TV show. I was working the tip line.
Oh,
Interestingly enough, before I forget, I got to give a plug. Even though I have absolutely nothing to do with the show anymore, April 21st, 2025, America's Most Wanted returns weekly to Fox. Thank goodness. I had such great memories working at that show. They've done such great work. They took well over 1,000 fugitives off the street, people that were on the run for decades. They were taken off the street due to people just calling in tips. I think it was such a travesty to take that show off the air. So I'm very glad to hear that it's back online. But I was part of that back then while I was working the lab. You know, it was funny because we'd profile a case on Saturday night, and then Monday the evidence would come into the lab, and I'm working that same case, and I can't tell anybody about it.
I know that they were very successful, and I've done a number of case reviews about fugitives where the agents went down, because it was in Washington, D.C., wasn't it?
Yes, Friendship Heights at the Fox building.
They went down there and profiled their subjects, and many of them with success.
Yeah, absolutely. Back then, the FBI had what were known as fugitive squads, which was kind of silly because it mimicked what the U.S. Marshals did, but the FBI had a component of that. And the Washington fugitive squad was always there every week to help field calls. And I got to know one of the agents, Jim Reitler. Well, years later, I'm an agent. I got, 14 years in. I'm working on special operations, doing ground and air surveillance. And some guy comes up from CERG, the Critical Incident Response Group, to teach us about this new technology that they're rolling out for the SO programs. And lo and behold, it's Jim Reitler. I said, "Do you remember me? I remember you at America's Most Wanted." And we started talking about the old days. So it was great. And all the people that worked the phone lines, most of them were FBI support employees. So I got to know people in human resources. I got to know people in accounts all over the FBI just by working at America's Most Wanted. It was a great time.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. And again, you're saying that the show, I know it was rebooted for a while because one of our colleagues, Jim and Tim Clemente, who run a production company, I think they did like 6 to 10 episodes of that trying to reboot it. But it sounds like someone else, some other producer came in and they're going to do it again.
John Walsh and his son did a show called In Pursuit on, I think it was on Lifetime for a little while, but it didn't last very long. And it wasn't a weekly show. It would run maybe 2 weeks, and then you'd have to wait a week or two, and then another episode will pop up. It wasn't consistent. This is being promoted. Again, I'm just saying what I've seen online. It's being promoted as a weekly show, just like the old AMW. Every week on Saturday, starting the 21st, they're going to start profiling fugitives again like they should, because we need to clean up our streets.
Because this is not going to air before then we'll just let people know that if they don't know about it yet, that they can check out those episodes.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right, very good. I know that working healthcare fraud was not what you wanted to do when you first came in. So, did you continue as a healthcare fraud agent, or did you move on to something that fit your?
Well, interestingly enough, the day that we took down Scarpa, because steroids were in the news, I go home. It was a long day. We had a long search. I turn on the news. I'm going to watch myself some ESPN sports, and there's my case on ESPN. I get a call that my case was briefed to the director. Obviously, that caught the attention of our front office in Newark, and it wasn't long before I got a call, and they're like, how would you like to be on the drug squad? I was like, yeah, I can't wait. I moved to the drug squad for a while, and I did that. Shortly, well, it wasn't too shortly after, maybe about a year and a half afterwards, I became the public affairs person, just like you.
How long did you do that?
I was doing that for 4 years in Newark, and that was a very rewarding position.
I loved it. And I know that a lot of that job has now gone to professional journalists
Yes.
and PR people. But I don't know. I just felt having an agent in that job, like they do in law enforcement departments all over the country, somebody who's worked that job or who has worked investigations. I did think there was value in that.
Well, you got to remember, things have changed since we did it. Like when we were doing it, we wrote press releases. We held our own press conferences. You're hard pressed to find that now. Everything is run by the U.S. Attorney's Office. All the press conferences are there. All the press releases are there. The FBI doesn't really produce any of their own content anymore on that stuff.
Okay. So I did not know that. Yeah. Because I did all the on camera stuff.
So did I.
Oh, so the job really has changed.
Dramatically.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because you're right. I was the one writing the press releases. I was the one going to all the conferences, sometimes even representing. I worked directly as a direct report for all the SACs. I think I had 4 or 5 during the 4.5 years I did it.
Yeah. And not only that, I don't know about you guys in Philadelphia, but I was also required to teach media to all the police chiefs and everything. I even got called up to Boston to go teach.
Yes, I did that for Leeds. Was it Leeds?
Yeah. Yeah. That was a program. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I also went out to the county and taught too. And of course, went down to Quantico and they had an excellent program.
I was fortunate enough when I went through, I was personally taught by John Miller. You know John Miller?
Yeah, that was during my time period.
Yeah. The assistant director, they made him, but he was the only journalist to ever interview Osama bin Laden, which was kind of cool.
Yes.
But he personally taught me how to handle the media, which was great.
That was definitely during my time period as the spokesperson for the FBI. All right. Well, that makes me feel a little better to know that the role is different now because I did that from early 2004 until late 2008 before I retired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right around when I started the role, was 2008.
Now that I know that, it may have a little bit to do with the erosion of our public perception also, because we weren't the ones out there speaking for ourselves. That gives me some thought.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. If you talk to some of the PAOs today, sometimes we barely get a mention in a press release. We'll get like 2 words at the last line of a press release, which is kind of sad considering all the hard work of the agents that they put into it. Some of these cases, they're years in the making. Their families sacrifice with them because they're not home for anniversaries and birthday parties and whatnot. And they're just not getting the credit, but it is what it is.
The reality is, if any of us got into the job as a special agent with the FBI to get credit for anything, then we were in the wrong job.
Well, yes, but you were saying about our image, and I think that kind of plays part of it.
And that's why I have this show, to make sure that people understand the commitment, the sacrifices, the dedication that it takes to do these types of investigations, especially the ones where it takes us more than, a year or 2 in order to get to a successful resolution.
There are cases right now in the Newark office. I started one in It had to be like 2012. And it's still going on today. It's became like one of these standard cases going on where they're tracking people using stolen credit card numbers to purchase stuff under government accounts. It's weird.
Well, you learned a lot during your FBI career. What are you doing with that experience? What are you doing now?
I have always been interested in the creative arts. So when I retired, I couldn't wait to pursue that. So that's what I'm doing now. I am a professionally trained actor and voiceover artist, and that's what I'm doing these days.
Oh, anything that you've been in that we can look for you?
Nothing big yet. I'm doing a lot of indie projects because I'm still relatively new to the business. However, I did recently do an audition for an HBO show. No word on that. It's funny because auditioning in show business is very much like applying to the government. You apply and then you forget about it and move on with life. And long after you've forgotten about it, you'll get a call out of the blue. Hey, are you still interested for this? That's how this process works. I'm very well suited.
You know how to play the game.
Yes.
Well, good for you, and I wish you luck with that.
Yeah, people can look for me on my website. It's Bryan Lee Travers, BryanLeeTravers.com.
All right. I will also put a link to your website in the show notes for this episode.
Very good.
I like to give my guest the last word. What would you like to say?
I would like the American people to still trust the FBI. There have been things over the past couple years that have been done in the FBI that are not worthy of the Americans' trust. But by and large, the FBI worker bees are very dedicated to the mission. They're very dedicated to America, very loyal to America. And they just can't do the job without your help. They just can't. When I came through in the lab, I was taught you are here today and you enjoy the reputation of everyone that earned that reputation before you. Don't tarnish it. I want to see the FBI get back to that level. And with that, the public's backing of us. It's been a rough time for those of us who put our heart and soul into the FBI. And as you know, it's been a roller coaster the past couple of years. I think things are finally starting to settle down. And I just want to urge the public to keep the faith. We're there for you. People sacrifice. It's not just the agent, it's the whole agent's family that sacrifices for these cases and to take these bad guys off the street.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to the show notes where you'll find a photo of Bryan Travers and a longer bio for him. There are also links to articles about Operation Raw Deal, the arrest and sentencing of Alfred Scarpa for his role in the nationwide anabolic steroid investigation, and case-related images. There's also a link to another FBI retired case file review episode featuring a healthcare fraud case. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.